Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Showing Up to Your Life podcast and YouTube channel. My name is Art Burns, and I am really excited to be here with you today. Got a lot of great stuff to talk about today. I'm just super excited. I actually just got done recording my other podcast with the Adam and Art Hour, which you have probably heard me mention before. I do this other podcast with a beautiful human being named Adam Asdell, who we talk every week. We do about an hour long just conversation about whatever, and it's usually a very winding conversation. We cover a lot of different topics in this conversation. It's worth a listen. I mean, we've got a lot of great feedback from it. So if you're interested in that, just check it out. It's on all the places where you can find this podcast. It's called Adam and Art Hour. It might be listed under the Learning to Surf title, right? And Learning to Surf is sort of this initiative that we're doing that includes the podcast, but it also includes, and not only the Adam and Art Hour, but Adam also does interviews with other people. I do some interviews with other people, and we put it all in the podcast, right? And yesterday I actually even just read a chapter from this book, which I'm gonna put that this book is The Pocket Thich Nhat Hanh, by the way. I'm gonna put the recording of that at the end of this podcast today, so you can hear it, because it's quite a beautiful little chapter of this book, and it's going to really relate to what I want to talk about today. So one of the things we do in these as part of Learning to Surf, it's the podcast, and it's also a couple of meetings every week. So every week on Saturday morning at 9 a.m., Adam hosts the Saturday Sit, right? So it's about an hour long. So he hosts the Saturday Sit, and then I host the midweek mindfulness meeting, right? Which is the Wednesday evening. So his is on Saturday morning at 9 a.m. Mountain Time. Mine is at 7 p.m. Mountain Time on Wednesday evening, right? And what the format is very simple. And by the way, I usually try to tell you all the different time zones and stuff, but you know what? I just signed up for something that had this beautiful, and I'm going to tell you about this in a second, but they had this beautiful solution for that. They just wrote down below the time that they are saying, it said, Google what time is 11 a.m. Pacific time, right? And like to find your local time. It's the easiest way to do it. I don't know why I never thought of this before, but thank you, Dr. Kristen Neff, for telling me this. But anyway, first things first, the meetings that we do every week, right? One on Saturday morning, one on Wednesday evening. You can Google what time is 9 a.m. Mountain Time or 7 p.m. Mountain Time to find your local time for those. It's a really wonderful time. And what we do is we do about a 25, 30-minute meditation, right, where Adam or I guide you through the meditation, right? And then we, after the meditation is done, we do about a half hour, whatever's remaining in the hour, we do a discussion. And some of these discussions get very, very just beautifully deep. And people are really, people open up. It's a great way to sort of, and this is something that Adam and I talked about on our podcast today, that when you're getting into the mindfulness practices, right, when you're beginning your journey, right, it really helps to have other people who do this work also, right? Not because you want to, show off, or you want to like be part of a club or something like that. But really what happens is, and this is what I just told Adam today on the podcast, is that, a lot of times when we're beginning, especially when we're beginning this work, right, we kind of have this sort of, duality, right, where we think of, well, I have my life as the, this part of my life where I'm practicing mindfulness is over here, right? But this is my life where I go to the office every day and I stop at Starbucks and I get angry at people in traffic and stuff like that, right? And so they're two different people almost, right? And so being part of a community, right, in which you have other people who are working on this kind of stuff as well, it gives you a way to sort of bridge that and sort of make this work sort of integrated into your life in a really kind of deeper way, and that is going to really help your practice. All right, so this is open for you. Okay, there's no cost involved. I mean, we do put it out there that we offer, we offer you an opportunity to make a donation if you so choose. Right, it helps. It does cost us a couple $100s a month to do all this, but we're happy to cover that. Donations would be beautiful and very well appreciated and very well received, gratefully. However, you don't need to, right? So just show up, okay? And there's nothing that you need to do, or all you got to do is sign up on this Meetup app, and you'll get all the information, get all the access to everything you need. And so I strongly encourage you to consider this invitation to come into this group. And a lot of people in the beginning, they don't turn their camera on, they don't turn their mic on, they just take it in, right? And that's okay, right? You don't have to say anything, you don't have to be part of the discussion, but you never know what you might hear. Right? You never know when it's one of the things I love about teaching group sessions, which I'm starting just next week. I'm so excited that when you're in a group, right? Like when person A asks a question, person Q can learn from that question, right? Person Q didn't even realize they had that question. But because person A, asked the question and I answered person A, now person Q says, well, hold on a second. This just made me think of like, what about this, right? And then that question that I'm answering for person Q is also going to help person H, right? Like, that's the way it works. And so you never know what you might find by coming into these meetings. And again, they're totally free. We purposely done one on the weekend morning so it's easy for people to get to, and one in the middle of the week. We're trying to accommodate everybody. I really, and also if you look up the Learning to Surf podcast, we post the meetings on the podcast, so you can actually check it out and you can see what it's all about. Just go to Learning to Surf or the I think Learning to Surf podcast. If you look that up on Spotify or Apple or any of the podcast platforms, you should be able to find it. All right, and if you can't, just hit me up. I'll send you a link, okay? And I will put a link in the description to register for tomorrow's Saturday Sit if you're interested, okay? And I'm also going to put the link in for my new course that's happening. Well, first it's the webinar, right? The webinar is this Sunday, and I'm getting that webinar vibe, and I'm getting really excited for this. I love hosting live webinars. They're so fun. It's kind of like the podcast, but with a people there, like people logged in on the Zoom call. And a lot of times, I encourage the openness, and I encourage people to consider turning on their cameras and just, joining in the conversation in a live kind of manner. It really makes the webinar a little bit more exciting that way, but even if that doesn't happen, it's just really exciting to know that people are out there really, directly, kind of benefiting from this specific thing that I'm doing. Sometimes I get these emails after the webinar, before even people sign up for the course, before they do any of the work, just the webinar, they've emailed me back and said, this just changed everything for me. Some of the things you said just, put things in perspective for me. And it's just so great and so thankful and so happy and brilliant, blah, blah, blah. And it's awesome. I mean, it's not really blah, blah, blah. It's really heavy and beautiful stuff. And so that's just an indication of, my webinar game. It's very strong. So if you want to check it out, and you don't have to be struggling with anger to learn something in this webinar either, right? So I love to have a big audience. Okay. So that link is also going to be in the description below. Okay, the link to join this free webinar. Now, this is totally free. Like, you can't, if you throw money at me, I'm going to let it sit on the floor, right? Like, it's not. This is completely free. There's no cost whatsoever involved with it. Okay, and then I'm going to talk about my program though in the webinar, and that might be something you're interested in, and it might be also something that a family member or a friend of yours could benefit from. So attending the webinar might help you to help someone else. So check it out, So anyway, I mentioned also that one last thing here before I get into today's topic. I mentioned before that I signed up for this thing, right, with Dr. Kristen Neff. You might recognize her name, Dr. Neff, as the person who is the founder and I guess head or co-founder or whatever. Co-founder of the the Center for Mindful Self-Compassion, right? Dr. Neff and her colleague, who I'm pretty sure is named Michael Gerber, and I apologize, sir, if if I got your name wrong. I'm very, very sorry. But they are believe those are the two co-founders of the Center of Mindful Self-Compassion. Okay, and they, Dr. Neff works out of the University of Texas at Austin, and Dr. Gerber, if that is your name, sir, thank you very much for what you do. He is out of Harvard. Okay, two pretty smart people, right? And they've been doing this. they have been leading and pioneering the sort of discipline of self-compassion and by discipline I mean like school of study, right, of or a school of practice of self-compassion, right? And there's so much information that they have brought forth through their research that shows us how important this self-compassion is, and this is going to tie deeply into what we're talking about today. Okay, so I'm not off topic here, even though I might seem like I am. But anyway, the Center for Mindful Self-Compassion, CMSC, sorry, is going to they're hosting this beautiful silent retreat next Saturday. It's online, okay, or I think they might host it locally if you happen to be wherever they're doing it. But it's available online though, right? And there's 3 different sessions. I think one starts at like 11 a.m. Pacific. They're like maybe 45 minutes to an hour long, and so there's a little break in between. But it's basically like 3 or 4 hours out of the afternoon on Saturday. It's going to be this silent retreat to benefit the folks in India who are really, really under a lot. They're oh my gosh, what's happening there with COVID is just it's like right back where we were last year, and it's really, really really hard to think about how people are suffering right now and what's going on over there. So this project here, this initiative is meant to somehow I don't know how it's going to benefit them because they didn't ask for any money, right? So like I signed up for free. So I don't know exactly how they're going to do it. I don't know if maybe it's also just like an energy thing, right? There's a story that from Washington, D.C. in somewhere in 1992, 93, 94, around there. 400 transcendental meditators came together in Washington, D.C. with the express stated intention of lowering the crime rate of Washington, D.C., which at the time was like the murder capital of the world. Like it was like the worst place to be, right, in terms of crime at that time, early 90s. And so these 400 meditators said that they're going to come here to Washington, D.C., and they're going to meditate all day, every day for 1 month. And through that month of their work, you're going to see the crime rate lower by about 10%, is what they said. The police chief famously came out and had a news conference and said in the middle of summer, right, it's July when they did this, the police chief famously had this news conference, said the only thing that's going to reduce the crime rate by 10% this month is if it snows, right? Which of course is not going to snow in the East Coast on in July, right? Well, turns out at the end of the month, they recorded that the crime rate, and nobody can give a reason for why this happened, right? Like there's no, like they've tried, believe me, they've tried. And you can look this up, just Google DC meditation project or something like that. You'll find it. And if you can't find it, hit me up. I'll find the link somewhere and I'll send it to you. But it turns out that they lowered the crime rate by 25%. Right. So there's this very, sort of fringe scientific kind of concept that if 1% of a population, right, does something, it's going to impact the rest of the population. And that's what they did, right? They have 400 people in a city of, I guess, 400,000 people, right? It was 1% of them. They, right, because 400... Yeah, that would be right. I think so. Anyway, I might have the math wrong. Check out the article, right? Again, if you Google Washington, D.C. meditation early 90s, I'm sure it'll pop up. And if you can't find it, let me know and I'll help you find it, all right? But anyway, so you might want to check that out, right? It's for a great cause, and it's going to be probably, there's 3 different sessions. One is hosted by somebody I don't know. Another one is hosted by Dr. Neff, and the other is hosted by Dr. Gerber. I'm curious to see what it's going to be, and I'm sure it's going to be awesome. So so check it out if you're around next Saturday on the 22nd of May. So how does that tie into what we're talking about today, Art? I'm sure that's what you want to know at this point. 15 minutes into this podcast, I've done nothing but drool on about all kinds of different stuff. Well, yeah, so we've been talking a lot this last week or so about a lot of anger, right? And there's a reason for this. I'm not selfishly, but it's an intentional thing that I've done because of this course that I'm about to start, right? Or this webinar I'm going to do on Sunday, right? I want to kind of let people know and also I want like people who are signing up for this, they're probably looking up and finding the podcast, so I want them to hear what we're talking about here. I want them to know what's going going on in this community here, right? But anger, the whole kind of concept of anger, right? Or like what anger is there to help us do, right? It really does come from a place of love, right? Because when we're and I know that I always say how the negative emotions are rooted in fear and the positive emotions are rooted in love, and so that this might sound a little contradictory to that. But anger is sort of the outlier of this, right? Anger, yeah, it could be seen as a negative emotion, but it could also be seen as a positive emotion, right? And the reason for that is that, anger is the number one motivator that we have, right? Like there's nothing that's more motivating in our bodies than the emotion of anger, right? Save for maybe, starvation, like if you're really hungry, that's a very motivating factor too. Sex is a very, strong motivator too. But let's say of all the emotions, right? Anger is probably the one that is the most, sort of compelling, right? And most, motivational, right? And so a lot of times though, again, anger, as I've talked about here a lot these last couple of weeks, is that, anger is something that is this wonderful, tool that we have, this wonderful resource that we have, right? But if it's used in a way that is, if it's overused, right, it actually goes from something that is enormously positive, enormously beneficial to us. It goes from that really beneficial thing to something that could literally kill us, right? It's literally eating us up inside if it's used on a chronic level, or not used, but if it's experienced on a chronic level. Right. And so, so in a lot of ways, like those of us who have, experienced chronic anger, right. And experience it in a present way. I said have experience, but like I said yesterday, if you're someone who deals with chronic anger, it's like it's never really going to be gone, right? Like you got to learn how to coexist with it. It's kind of like alcoholism, right, or any other addiction, right? There's never a time where an addict is no longer an addict, right? The addict is either an active addict or a recovering addict, right? There's no such thing as cured of addiction, right? Because the addiction is something that's happening inside you, right? It's something that's like it's happening as a result of certain developmental things that have gone on, and also many things that have happened throughout your life, in terms of trauma and crises and stuff like that. And so it's not something that we can necessarily, get past, as much as it is something that we can, again, sort of co-opt into our lives, right? And so, that's what this course that I'm going to be talking about is all about, right? And so one of the really helpful sort of ways to sort of look at this, right, or to understand it, I should say, is to look at the fact that, the emotions that we experience, right, and especially when they're the chronic emotions, right, and it is definitely applies to anger, but it could also apply to things like, chronic shame, or chronic fear, or chronic shyness, or, any of these things, right? Like it's all kind of, anything that you find yourself doing chronically, right? Which means that it's just all the time, right? And it becomes automatic, right? It becomes the thing that you're just, it's just the way things happen, right? You're not trying to do it. You're just always getting angry, right? Like you don't want to get angry, but you can't help it, right? That's a chronic kind of condition, right? And so anything that is that chronically, present for you, is usually at least partially, rooted in something that's happened to you along the way in your life, right? And most of that is from a very early time in your life, from when you were a child, right? And here's the thing though, right? And I like to talk about this because, kind of illustrating this for you, shows you that it's not your fault, and it's not your parents' fault either, right? Because if we keep going back, right, we realize that, when we were children, right, we experienced some trauma. Every child experienced some level of trauma, right? Even very sheltered, wealthy people, they experience a different kind of trauma, but there's trauma, right? There's no such thing as a childhood without any kind of trauma, right? Now, that's not to diminish the heavy trauma, right? It's not that I'm not trying to diminish what, people who've, like the trauma that I experienced is much, much different from the trauma that a child who experienced, physical abuse, right, or sexual abuse or something like that, right? There's a vast, vast gulf, or a huge wide spectrum, right, in which trauma can manifest, or people can experience trauma, right? But the thing is that trauma is very relative, right? Like, so yes, the child who experienced some gruesome, horrible abuse at the hands of a malicious adult, right, is going to have a certain level of damage that exists, right? Whereas my damage is going to be much different because I did not experience something like that, right? But my perception of my trauma, it's not diminished because somebody else had it worse, right? Like, that's not how it works, right? Like, my experience, I am the center of my universe, right? And so what, just from the standpoint that everything happens to me, right? Like in my experience, I'm at the center of it, right? And so whatever happened to me, is difficult for me, right? So even though I might, my trauma might be different from another person's trauma, you know, relatively speaking, right? My trauma is my trauma, and it's still hard, and it's still very difficult, right? So I just wanted to put that caveat out there, right? I don't want anybody thinking that I'm diminishing, big trauma that people do experience. I mean, there's evil in there's not evil in the world, but there's people who do evil things in the world, right? And hurtful things, and so I don't mean to diminish that. Okay, if you're out there and you deserve, but I'm also trying to, validate everybody's trauma. I hope you understand where I'm coming from with that. Okay, but as I said, you can go backwards and you can keep going backwards, right? There's a beautiful book called "It Didn't Start With You," where he goes into, the author Mark Wollman, I think his name is. He goes into the sort of genetic sort of basis for how generational trauma happens. That we actually store the cortisol that your grandparents were experiencing when your mother was was in your grandmother's womb, right? The cortisol levels that your grandmother experienced in that time are present in your body, right? Like, that's, genetically speaking, that's how it's working, right? But it's also working in a contextual way as well, right? That there's certain patterns, there's certain behaviors, right, that are passed on from one generation to another, to another, to another, and that's what all becomes very, sort of automatic, ingrained, kind of habitual behavior. That's what becomes our trauma. Right. And so a lot of times, when we talk about anger and we talk about any kind of big emotions that we're dealing with, right, it's usually rooted all the way back then, right? Even before we were born, right? But certainly on the contextual level, right? As far as our experience is concerned, right? It's been happening since we were very, very young for most people, right? Or at least to some extent, everyone, right? And so this anger that we're feeling, right? A lot of times, when, we hate our anger, right? Like, I used to hate my anger, right? I used to think that it was a flaw. It was an ugly flaw. It was something that I didn't want to have on me anymore, right? It was horrible. It was just like, get it off me, get it out of me, cut it out of me, give me a surgery, do something. I got to get rid of this thing, right? But to look at it that way, though, right, is to look at, because the anger is part of who you are. Right. And again, it doesn't make you bad. It's not a bad thing to have that anger. It's about control. It's about learning to, control and regulate how you express that anger. Right. But the anger itself is what makes you who you are. And there's nothing wrong with that. In fact, we need you to be angry the way that you are. We need your anger, because your anger motivates you in a way that nothing else can motivate you. Well, no other emotions can motivate you, right? And so the idea then, right, becomes to love our anger, right? And the way that we can love our anger, and here's where I loop it back to Dr. Neff and Dr. Gerber, we can love ourselves exactly the way we are, right? Not loving ourselves on the condition or the provision that the anger is going to be gone, right? Not loving ourselves in spite of our anger, not loving ourselves only when we're not experiencing the anger. All of this is very conditional, right? But to instead love ourselves unconditionally, right? Just like, you would love a young child. Like if you're a parent, you know what unconditional love is all about. And it's about, that crying baby, right? Like let your anger be a crying baby. Right? Let your anger be that poor little sweet little innocent thing that's just, it's scared, it's hungry, it's uncomfortable, it's got poop in its diapers, whatever it is, right? It needs something. Right? It needs your attention. It needs your care. It needs your love. And that ultimately is the course that I'm going to be working on here in next Sunday rather. It starts the day after the silent retreat for India. It's about coming into this love for ourselves, right? Which is self-compassion, right? And when we can practice the self-compassion, right, we start to get to a point. We ultimately get to a point where, we love ourselves in all of the different ways, right? All the different modes, all the different manifestations that we can possibly experience, right? We love ourselves through all of it, right? Where that love for ourselves becomes sort of the operating system. It becomes the prism. It becomes the medium for our lives, right? Where it all starts with loving ourselves. Right? So there's never a time where you say, oh, I need to change myself to not be this angry person anymore, right? That's not what it's all about. And programs out there that try to do that, right? Well, I don't want to talk about any other program because I don't know them deeply enough or anything like that. But in my opinion, when we try to, sort of deny part of ourselves, right? Sure, we might be solving a problem by doing that, right? We might be somehow alleviating something that's happening in our lives by doing that. But in all likelihood, it becomes like the game of whack-a-mole, right? Like you whack this mole and another one pops up somewhere else, right? That if we're just trying to, deny any specific emotion, whether it's anger or anything else, just that denial is going to cause, it's going to cause other problems, right? You might fix this one problem, but you might create another problem. Right. And so that's where I'm very leery of those kind of programs that say, things like anger management or anger control or things like that. It feels very, very unnatural to me. And it feels very, potentially dangerous, really. Right. Because what happens ultimately is that, you come up with life comes and gives you a good shot in the arm and you can't, something's going to happen. You're going to explode. Right. And then you're going to get into like a ragey kind of place. Right. And so what good was all that management? Right. If every, once a year, once every few months, you have this explosive episode. Right. My sort of approach to this is coming at it from a different place. It's coming at it from a place of getting to know the anger, right? Emotional intelligence, right? And mindfulness, being present with the anger, being accepting of this is who I am, right? Through all the different, what my parents went through, my grandparents through, and what I went through as a child, this is who I am. And this is what I'm bringing to the world. And that's just perfect. There's nothing wrong with it. No matter what. Now, what you do, your actions, that's different, right? If you're acting on your anger, right? Like I recently was watching this show on TV called Narcos, right? Which is on Netflix. It's about the Pablo Escobar and the Cali cartel and all these, this craziness that went on in the late 80s and early 90s. I mean, I lived through that. I lived in New York City. So I was, very much, like in that universe, right? And saw that stuff when it was happening. And I'm looking at it now and this guy, Pablo Escobar, I mean, what I'm seeing now as I'm watching this is, I mean, there's a guy who had some emotional regulation problems, like all of the horrible things that he did were as a result of his unbridled, unmanaged anger. Well, again, there's that word manage again, but that unregulated, anger, right? Like, and that's the thing, so Pablo Escobar's anger was not the problem, but blowing up planes and buildings and murdering people, that was the problem, right? But that doesn't mean that anger made that happen, right? Like there's something in between those two things, and that's where we work. Right? That space is where we work, in between the feeling of the anger and the slamming the door or the punching the wall or the, if you're Pablo Escobar, blowing up a plane, whatever, that's right. That's the thing, right? That's where we work. All right. Now I'm going to tell you much more about this on Sunday. If you come to my webinar, I'm going to tell you much more about this on Sunday and how it works. Okay. And then the following Sunday, we're going to start a 12-week program. And I am so excited. The people who attend this program are going to be like, oh my gosh, I'm so excited for everybody. It's going to be so amazing. So I hope you're able to come. I really do. You're warmly invited, cordially invited, and I hope you make it. All right. If you have any questions, there's also going to be a link to my personal calendar, right? So you can ask questions. If you want to book a time that we can talk for 45 minutes, free call, free coaching session, basically. So if you have any questions about this, wondering how this might apply to you or anything else, hit that link, book a call, and we'll talk. Okay. And otherwise, yeah, I hope I see you there on Sunday. I'm really excited. So thanks for listening. Oh, and lastly, so now I'm going to post a reading, because we talked about how, this stuff happens in childhood, right? So there's a little pocket Thich Nhat Hanh, which is all dirty and, it's a well-worn book. It's lived in my backpack for years, and so, he has this chapter. So during our meetings, right, our midweek mindfulness meeting, and also on the Saturday sit, one of the traditions we have is that we ask everybody to, we pick a book, and this week I picked this book, and we ask everybody to come up with one person volunteer a page number, right? And whatever that page number is, we read from that page, and it's almost always like so tied into what we talked about in the discussion. It's like eerie. Like, it's like, was he listening to us? It's like that kind of thing where your phone, you look up an ad for, you click on an ad for like log cabins, and then all of a sudden you see nothing but log cabins all over the place. Like, it's like that, and so this week somebody picked page 110, and that started a chapter called The Wounded Child Within. Right, which is what we just talked about, right? And so I didn't read the whole chapter last week. I read just a few, paragraphs, a couple of pages, as is our tradition, right? But then yesterday, I actually recorded myself reading the entire chapter because it's just so beautiful, and I posted that to the Learning to Surf podcast. And I'm also going to post it now. It's going to be right now. Here you go. Enjoy it.